Hey guys, it's Mohammed Jawad from bitban.org. I've recently pushed a new GitHub repository, which is a blog API using Django REST framework with a cool authorization architecture. We have a root user who has no limitation. He's the owner of the system and can do anything with articles and user accounts. Next, we got a user manager who can edit users, block users, grant some roles to some users, and etc. We got some authors that each of them can write articles in some categories that are granted to them. This also applies on article managers, who can manage articles in some categories that are granted to them by the user manager or the root user. They can create articles, modify articles, verify them, reject them, and etc. On the other hand, we got some customers that are divided into some levels. Normal users, bronze users, silver users, golden user, that based off these they have access to some specific articles. I've written a full documentation for this repository which is available on GitHub in case you want more details. Now let's clone our repository and review the codes. I hope you learn a lot throughout this. First, we clone our repository, we create our virtual environment and activate it. Then we'll install the requirement libraries listed in requirements.txt file. Then we'll migrate the database and load the initial data. Next, we'll run the server to make sure everything is okay and open the code in VS Code. Inside our models.py of our user app, we got some proper imports. Then we got a class named user manager, which is the manager of our user model. In the create user method, we check if these two mandatory fields are provided, phone and username. Otherwise, we'll return actually raise an exception. Then we'll create a user object with this self.model which points to our custom user model. Then we'll set the password and save the user, then return it. In the create super user method, first we call this create user method, which we just explained, and we'll set these three fields to true. Note that this is active flag is not true by default because our users need to verify their phone number after registration. Then we'll save the user and return it, just like create user. In our custom user model, we got a phone field which we store our user's phone number. We got an OTP, one-time password, which will be text message to user each time he wants to log in. We got some flags, exautor is active. We got the categories, that is a many-to-many field, which is the categories that user works in. Required fields are phone, username is required by default. Our objects is equal to the user manager we just explained. Has per method will first check if the user directly has that permission with this if clause. If not, it will check if the group that user is in might have that permission. The is article manager will check if the user has article management permission. Is user manager will do that. Actually, save these article management and other permissions in our settings module, which I will demonstrate them now. Here we got some strings. Article manager is equal to this string. This is just because we can modify it in future more easily. Is article manager will check if the user has the permission. User manager also will do that. Is manager also, and so on. In the get random username, first we'll get a random string with this get random string, which is imported from django.utils.crypto. Then we'll get the current time in order to make sure our string is unique, our username is unique. Then we'll append this time to our random string. We have some proper imports here in our user serializer. The read user serializer is responsible for reading users info, and the categories field is users category. We got models user and these fields. This get fields method is here because we don't want everybody to see every field of users. We want just root user and user manager be able to see all info. For other users, they can only see the fields which are stored in the allowed fields in line 24. The create user serializer is responsible for creating users. This OTP field is one-time password which will be write only and alone null because we don't create OTP the time we create user. This validate method checks if a user is changing his allowed fields. Every user cannot change all the fields. For example, a user cannot change the field that shows if he is blocked or not, or other fields. They are only allowed to change username, email, phone, first name, and last name. Other fields can only be changed by the user manager or the root user. This validate method checks that. Allowed fields are stored in the allowed fields variable. The data that user is trying to change will be saved in dataset. User is in user. And we check if the user is authenticated and he's not user manager or the allowed fields is not a superset of dataset, then we'll raise an error. This means he's not changing the allowed fields. In the user view set, we got some imports of our REST framework library, our simple JWT, and our serializers, models, and the proper permission class. We handle the permission class of this user view set throughout this user manager or read only, because only the user manager or the root user can use the create action of the user view set. The serializer is read user serializer on safe methods and the create user serializer on post method. The context is the dictionary you're seeing, and the query set depends on the user permission and roles. The super user, the root user can get all the users, user manager can get all users except those who are staff who can log in admin area, and the article managers can get authors and himself. Of course, you can change this logic based on your need. In the register action, we use this get random username method, which actually we implemented in the user model. Next, we'll get the OTP from the generate method, which actually this one is presented here. Yes. We store the digits in chars variable and actually randomly choose some of them from these characters and return a string of those we selected randomly actually. Next, we use this get serializer method to get the serializer with the data that user sent. We check if it's valid and save the user. Then, with the help of this SMS OTP method, we try to message user the OTP that has been generated. Here we just print the OTP, but you can implement the message or under the hood process if you want. User should verify his phone number after registration using this verify action. If the phone number is verified, we actually change the is active field in the user model to true and clear the OTP, which is stored in line 61. And then we will actually update the user with the serializer and return the proper response. The get OTP action is used to log in. The logic is to get user's phone number, generate an OTP, and if the user is active, actually save that OTP in his OTP field and actually message him the OTP, and he has to send the OTP in order to log in another action. The send OTP action is actually the action I just talked about. In this action, user sends his phone number and the OTP he received from the message, and we check if the user is active and the OTP is right. We get a token. Here we use a JWT token, which actually is generated from the simple JWT library which we installed. We have a refresh token in order to regenerate the token, and an access token in order to access the APIs through this JSON web token. The next method we call is the flush OTP method. The purpose of this method is to clear the OTP after the user has successfully logged in, because the OTP, as the name implies, is a one-time password and we shouldn't keep it stored in user model. Using modify me action, each user actually can modify himself. We first get the user from the request.user, then we will call the proper serializer, check if the data is valid, save the user, and return the new data. Next, we have this permissions module, which this isAdmin or read-only permission class lives there. It is derived from this base permission class that makes post, put, patch, or this kind of HTTP methods only available for admin users. Other users can only read the API. Other permission classes are pretty much the same except this can write or read-only permission class. The purpose is to allow only the article managers and authors to write and change articles. It basically does an OR operation on two permission classes which are for each of them separately. In my users admin module, I have some classes which I've copied them from this documentation. I'll put the link in description, copy it, change it in a way that it fits your model's needs. I'll put this on your own. There is nothing left in the users app. Next, we check the blog app. The first model we have is this article model, which starts from some static attributes. This permissions is just a dictionary of my permissions names, which I wanted to use them to render my scopes. You can use any other structure that fits best to your project. This was the scope I was talking about. I didn't want to write that permission names twice or multiple times in my project. I just wanted to have one single source of them. Next model is the category, which is pretty straightforward. In the article read serializer, we have category, which is a nested serializer, author, scope, status, which are method fields. We imported here because not to face circular import error. For scope and other method fields, we have lambda functions. You can use simple functions as well. That's because we want to see the human readable names for those choice fields of our DB. In the article write serializer, we have these fields and we have overridden this get fields method in order to allow the article manager only to change and write all the fields of the articles, and authors are only allowed to change title, body, scope, and category. We see the validate category method, which checks if the category is valid, otherwise it will raise a validation error. Same happens for the status field with the help of validate status method. I think the category serializer does not need any explanation. In the article viewSet class, we have this famous can write or read-only permission class which we explained. We add the current user to the serializer context with the help of this get serializer context method. In the getQuerySet method, we return the proper query set of articles based on the user's permissions. Note that in the performCreate method, we pass the current user as the author. In the category viewSet, we have this category serializer, and in the getQuerySet, we return the user's categories if he's an article manager, and all the categories if he's anyone else. And of course, you can change the logic here. We have the blog's URL set up here and the user's URL config. In the installed apps, we have our REST framework and simple JWT and our user and blog apps. We added this JWT authentication class to the authentication classes of REST framework settings and a one-day lifetime to our JSON web token. Here, the auth user model is changed to our custom user model, and some static strings are saved here in order to be used in the other places of the project. This is just because we want a single source of truth here. And finally, in our main URLs module, we have our admin, users, and blog URL, followed by the simple JWT default URL for creating token, refreshing, and verifying it. As you know, all these URL explanations are available at the GitHub page of this project with the curl commands and extra description and information. Hope this was useful and made this project more clear to you so that you can use it in your projects and contribute to it in order to make it better. Goodbye.